Hello everybody, back here. I'm back again in my exercise yard at the back of the cottage. It's nice to see you all again. Today is the feast of Saint Dunstan, great English saint. A lot of you probably have never even heard of him. Those who have possibly heard the name might associate him some way with the blind, because one of their organisations is he is their patron, St Dunstan. Well, most people won't know who he is. Who is he? When did he live? Where did he live? What did he do? Well, if I say the word Glastonbury, then immediately, of course, people recognition. They remember the festival, which won't take place this year, of course. But they think of, well, I think of muddy fields and loads of people, music, modern music, and going on for two or three days, a great musical festival. But of course, Glastonbury was very much on the map long before that. In fact, in the Middle Ages, it was the centre of learning in this country. The monastery in this country in the Middle Ages, along with Westminster, those two were the outstanding ones. And it was really St Dunstan who put Glastonbury on the map. Well, where is it? It's in Somerset, in the middle of Somerset, and that's south of Bristol, about 25 miles south of Bristol. So that gives you some idea of where it is if you didn't know in advance. Dunstan came there. He lived in the 900s, so that's 200 or 300 years after Bede and those people around in this area. He came to Glastonbury as a hermit. He wanted to establish himself as a hermit. He built a hermitage alongside an existing monastery that was there, but it had been sacked by the Danes, and so a very troubled time. There were monks there, but it was a bit disorganised, and he didn't come to join them, he just wanted to live nearby. But in fact, he did join them. He joined them after a few years and became their abbot. And this was the transformation of Glastonbury. He began to reform the monastery spiritually. He imposed the rule of St Benedict. You know the rule of St Benedict, it centres around prayer, daily prayer. The main office is what we call the offices of the church. And then there's also, though, the learning side and the practical side. They always had manual work. Now he brought all these skills really because he was a very spiritual man, and so there was that side to it. He was a very clever person. He developed very much as an intellectual sort of person, very organised, but also very practical with his hands. He was an artist. He'd been trained as a silversmith, so he was good at metalwork and that type of thing. So he was well placed to bring the whole of the St Benedict's rule into the abbey at Glastonbury. But of course, it was run down, and so the next thing he did was he set about the building programme. He expanded it, attracted people to the monastery, and in that way it became very influential in the area. Well, as I said, he was a good organiser. He organised all that, and of course it wasn't long before the king noticed this, and so he used to ask his advice, made him more or less his prime minister, the local king, because there were all sorts of kings. In fact, it was a very difficult period certainly if you're trying to learn any history, and I know very little history about that area, but at that time, and it was very complex. He made him Bishop of Worcester, but then there was a certain amount of unification in the country, and there was a king called Edgar, and he, this was in the 900s, and he had established his authority over much of England, and he wanted to reform civilian life. He wanted to bring some organisation into civilian life. He also was a holy man, and he wanted to make sure that the church was well organised too, and that it was functioning well. Who better than Dunstan? So of course he called on Dunstan, made him Bishop of London, later Archbishop of Canterbury, and the two of them set about reorganising the whole of civilian life, but the whole of spiritual life too. Of course, as the Archbishop, he was able to bring his influence on the monasteries and on the clergy and so on. So between the two of them, they did extraordinarily well. And so that is really his great reason for fame, that he was that organised man, and he brought all that to both civilian life and to religious life. Really though, I think it was Glastonbury, because that was the lasting effect which it had. There he managed to provide somewhere where learning could develop, and that learning is still reflected in some of the manuscripts that are available. And so in the Bodleian Library in Oxford, which is the Oxford University Library, there are some of their oldest manuscripts date back to then. There's one which actually states on the front page, I think it is, that this book was ordered to be written by Dunstan. There's another one of them that has a drawing on it of a monk prostrate before a vision of Christ, and there's a D about it. The letter D is there, and it's imploring help for Dunstan, and it is thought that probably he drew that. Of course, as I said, he was an artist. And then there's a group of manuscripts from that area that the librarians have called, what was it they've called it now? Let's get this right, because I got it wrong previously. They call it St. Dunstan's Class Book. So there's about 3 or 4 manuscripts that go back to that sort of stage, and it's the librarians, of course, it doesn't have that title, but they call it St. Dunstan's Class Book. So there he was able to establish that monastery as a great centre of learning. I think of him as an enabler. Somebody like Bennet Biscop. Bennet Biscop was an enabler. You know, when you think of what he brought from Rome, the books, the skills, stonemasons, glasswork, the chanter, he came, you know, so there's the music, all those things that enabled those monasteries at that time, much earlier period, to be a centre of learning. Monk Wearmouth here in Sunderland, Jarrow and Lindisfarne, those 3 at that time. Well, now it was the turn of Glastonbury, and it was really Dunstan who enabled it. So I think of him as an enabler. So just to finish off, I would like to just have a prayer. You know, we're going to be in great difficulties. We are in great difficulties in all sorts of ways in coming out of this pandemic. We will need a lot of enablers. So let's just pray that through his intercession that there will be sufficient enablers throughout the world really, but also in our own country, to be able to put us all back on our feet again. And so, Lord, through the intercession of Saint Dunstan, give us those enablers who will help us to re-establish ourselves after this pandemic. And if you're listening to me, perhaps together we will just say, Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. Amen. Saint Dunstan, pray for us. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Goodbye. God bless you all.